Hello and welcome to another episode of the Minor Issues Podcast. I'm Mark Thornton at the Mises Institute. Today I'd like to present my essay from a book, A Life in Liberty, in honor of Hans-Hermann Hoppe, edited by Guido Holzmann and Stefan Kinsella, published in 2024. This volume presents essays in honor of Professor Hoppe on the occasion of his 75th birthday at the annual meeting of the Property and Freedom Society in Bodrum, Turkey. This book is a Festschrift prepared for Professor Hoppe in his honor, presenting 41 different contributions of both a personal and substantive nature, arranged in 7 sections, including the initial section containing personal reflections. My second essay is in the substantive section of the text. It's entitled, Hans Hoppe is No Revolutionary. Hans Hoppe entered my world through the Ludwig von Mises Institute, which had invited him to its headquarters in Auburn, Alabama, to give a lecture in the College of Business at Auburn University. At that point in time, he was a complete unknown in American academia. The date of that lecture, I believe, was in 1986. As I remember it, the lecture was very well attended by the standards of academia. The dean's large seminar room was completely full. Hans's lecture on the subject of public goods theory, and he read it from the written transcript of the lecture. His German accent was very thick in those days, and he spoke for an entire 1-hour period for the lecture. He proceeded to tear apart public goods theory in every and all respects, in the same way someone might butcher an entire cow on a kitchen table. The audience was stunned, and no questions were asked. The lecture was adjourned. My appraisal was that based on his early emotionalist presentation, dark German accent, and serious academic tone, that Hans had intimidated the entire audience. This was probably the closest thing many of the economics department faculty, educated almost exclusively in Southern state research universities, had come to a Karl Marx figure, and no insult intended, Hans. Moreover, Hans had attacked the foundation of one of the pillars of modern economics. Most of the faculty had no interest, research or otherwise, in public goods theory. However, it was a pillar of mainstream economics. That day, I saw Hans as a revolutionary, bold, courageous, and forthright. The audience also saw him in the same way, as a revolutionary, but in a bad way. In their minds, he was crazy because no professor at a state university would go around saying such things. After the seminar, I tried to use the tactic of agreement with the faculty. I would agree that Hans was crazy, but that in the previous conversations with individual faculty members, that they had agreed with 80 to 90% of what he had said regarding public goods theory, and that approach did not work. Over time, I realized that the shock value of the presentation had led me to consider Hans a revolutionary. His shock value has led others to consider him a reactionary, a fascist, a bigot, and more. And that's all wrong. The two most noteworthy injustices that Hans has come about by reactionaries and egalitarians. The first is the idea that monarchies make for better states based on his straightforward property rights analysis. Hans's analysis is correct, but democracy reactionaries howled, usually without addressing the analysis or maybe without even reading it. The second was an introductory classroom lecture where Hans used an example for illustration purposes of homosexuals having higher time preferences because they could not bequeath their wealth to their children. At the time, it was extremely difficult for homosexuals to adopt children. Again, there were egalitarian howls of protest around the profession and in academia and within his own university calling for his head, and again, no debate or discussion about the merits of his analysis. I and many others had used the exact same example in class, at least until that point in time. Hans's character assassination marks the ultimate victory of political correctness in American academia, something from which it will never recover. My own blemish is to have thought of Hans as a revolutionary at all. I am using the term here to mean someone who wants to change society from what it is to what they envision it for the future. They do not want to suggest a return to what worked in the past or what happens naturally. They want to take control of a nation or the world by taking control of the state and remake it in their very own image to suit their own goals and interests. In this sense, Hans Hoppe is not a revolutionary. He was just an objective analyst of the past and present. Of course, he is a natural rights theorist who attempts to check his analysis with economic theory, well-established history, and a thoroughly well agreed upon aspect of the nature of man. The three historic Western revolutions provide plenty of evidence for all libertarians to oppose, if not to abhor, revolution, as in revolution of the political sort. The American Revolution is a good place to start. Yes, Americans are happy to have an independent country and love to celebrate July 4th, and they hold the Bill of Rights dear. But that is not the right place to start. Prior to the illicit passage of the Constitution of the United States, the American colonies and Confederation had beaten the world's greatest economic and military superpower. Under the Articles of Confederation, the colonies had declared themselves independent states and were associated for limited purposes. The Constitution created a central government that has only grown in power relative to the states. It has made worse all of the problems that it was meant to solve, such as tariffs and inflation. Finally, it has grown to become the biggest threat to liberty and even human existence the world has ever known, rather than 13 independent and jealous small states. The French Revolution is supposed to be a mixed bag. To rid the country of the Bourbon dynasty and monarchy, the epitome of the absolute state. It enshrined concepts such as liberty and equality in government. However, there were excesses during and after the revolution that are considered by historians to be unfortunate. Boys will be boys. As evil as the dynasty was, the physiocrats and the great French economist Turgot and many others thought that it could be reformed simply by reestablishing rules of authority and budget constraints. Many of them joined the revolution to accomplish that. However, political revolutions once started are unstable and unpredictable, and in this case, the results were disastrous. Half a century of instability and murderous campaigns and wars would follow. The sanctity of private property, the pillar of Western civilization, had been forever scarred, if not destroyed. Democracy would bring the once great French nation eventually to its knees. The Russian Revolution is perhaps the greatest lesson of why revolutions are a bad thing and not to be desired by libertarians. Through a large, unplanned series of knee-jerk reactions on the part of the Tsar and the foreign governments involved in World War I, the most unlikely of all Russians, Lenin, was brought into supreme power, from which he launched the dastardliest assault on human life and property rights ever contemplated and accomplished. Hans Hoppe is the opposite of a revolutionary in this sense. His career is exemplary for his devotion to science, objectivity, and the truth. He does not want to change society for his personal purpose, but to allow it to be natural in the absence of a predatory state. The history of modern revolution underscores and mandates that libertarians not follow the revolutionary path. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Minor Issues Podcast. I'm Mark Thornton at the Mises Institute.